Thank you all very much for coming out. As we've said repeatedly in the last 15 minutes while we were playing around, my name is John Stevens, and I am running for Congress right here in the Indiana 3rd Congressional District. This is my first time as a candidate, but I've spent the last 20 years in the political arena. I got started knocking doors for Organizing for America during then junior Senator Obama's primary campaign against who eventually became Secretary Clinton. So I've been in this arena for a very long time, knocking doors, registering voters, and eventually moved into speech writing and advising candidates before on February 6th, we announced that I was going to be the candidate. And that was something that took us a long time and a lot of conversations as I sat down with various people and said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Are you interested in joining that team? Finally, we reached a decision to do this and we kicked it off on February 6th. So I'm real excited to be here talking to you this evening. And I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about me because I know we have a lot of questions. So let's just dive into those.
Okay. One was detailing your campaign experience, which you just did. So that's awesome. What differentiates you from Forrest Bower, the other Democrat who's running for nomination?
I can't answer that question because I have not spent time thinking about Forrest. The sole thing that we are thinking about is beating Jim Banks. I'm not familiar with anything that Forrest is doing.
He's talked to us before, so.
Okay, well, he's not going to be on the ballot, so it doesn't matter.
Oh, he's not? He didn't make the...
Oh, no, he will not be on the ballot that we vote on in November.
Oh, I got you.
No, I've spent no time thinking about it.
All right, awesome. How is your campaign reaching out to and advocating for marginalized groups like people with disabilities?
The best thing we can do is actually talk to members of that group. I like to joke, and it's only slightly a joke, and it's honestly kind of a sad joke. I'm a straight, white, Midwestern male. I was born on third base. I'm a member of the most privileged group of human beings to ever walk this planet. So I'm not the best voice for a marginalized community. But through the work of my outreach coordinator and through the work of my campaign team, I've been able to sit down and talk to members of those communities. I've been able to sit down and better understand what is going on with the Black community in Southeast Fort Wayne, or what is going on with some of the indigenous communities that have lost their lands throughout Northeast Indiana. I'm not the person who really gets to determine what's right for a community I'm not part of. To do that, I have to talk to them. I have to listen to them. I have to carry their ideas forward to Washington.
Thank you. Are there any congressional caucuses, and what committees would you be interested in being appointed to? Caucuses you would join. Okay.
Ethics. Mm-hmm. Agriculture is so important here. I would love to sit on the agriculture committee. And those would be the first ones.
Would you join a caucus?
You know, there's so many of them right now that I haven't spent time digging into all of them. Okay. There's a lot of strength in those caucuses, and there's a lot of ideas being exchanged in those caucuses. So eventually you end up in one. Mm-hmm. But right now the concentration is let's win an election. Let's beat Jim Banks. So I haven't spent a ton of time thinking about I believe last time I looked, 41 registered congressional Democratic caucuses.
John from Avila wants to know, will you continue your Twitter feed throughout the campaign? He says, I firmly believe it gives you constant exposure.
I am very thankful for a fantastic campaign team. We talk about messaging. We talk about sort of a tone and what we want to talk about, but I don't write tweets. So as long as a strong campaign team remains in place and they continue to build on that and work on that, of course, we're going to keep doing that. Twitter is a hugely important part of the political speak and the political stir these days.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Jake from Fort Wayne wants to know, considering this has long been a strongly held seat by Republicans, what's your strategy to win compared to where others have failed?
It's Jake here, because I'd kind of like to have a conversation with Jake.
I don't see him. No,
no?
I'm
okay.
sorry.
No, that's okay. I keep hearing this and I don't believe it. Yes, Republicans have held this seat, but Republicans have held the seat by gerrymandering it and by really working hard to depress the vote. They give us reasons not to show up. The fact of the matter is, Democrats do outnumber Republicans in the third, but for so long they've been split apart. We have been split apart. We've been put in little boxes. We've been told there's not enough of you, your vote will never matter. That's a lie. We outnumber them. We just have to roll out of bed and say, I'm proud to be a Democrat. These are the other Democrats that I'm going to stand with, and Jim Banks doesn't represent us. So there's that. There's a ton of us. There's an estimated 95 to 100,000 eligible unregistered voters right here in the Indiana third. Those are Democrats that have been told their vote doesn't matter. We're going to get them. We're going to door knock. We're going to register voters. We're going to get them out at the polls. But then we're also going to look at our neighbors who might have voted for Trump in 2016, but did not do it again in 2020. Those people are Democrats in waiting. They understand the danger and the demagoguery that is the Republican Party right now.
That kind of leads into this question from Jonathan. And I don't know if he's in here either, but oh, and I'm sorry, I forgot to say, if anyone on this call has a question that you'd like, put in the chat stack, and I will get to, I'll call on you to ask your question to John Stevens. My apologies. So Jonathan says, in a blog post from 2016, from the 2016 election, you were not excited by Bernie's messaging and supported Clinton early in the campaign. You also expressed potentially supporting a Republican who ran for the GOP nomination in 2016, but said they didn't have a chance. Aside from Banks being a worse candidate, why should progressives support a candidate in a long shot race who just moved to Indiana in July of 2020 from Colorado and has only recently pivoted towards progressive rhetoric when we should be focusing on voter registration, mutual aid, and collective bargaining, as well as candidates with stronger resumes and more winnable seats?
Wow, that was a lot. I'm trying to remember the blog post. It sounds like something I would have written. I'm not going to deny it.
Yeah, I have the blog post.
16, are we talking about Kasich in 16?
I don't know who it was you supported in 2016.
Well, and I've never voted for a Republican in a presidential election, but I have because living in Colorado, you could pull either primary ballot. I have dabbled in that primary once in my life because I wanted to mess with the other party. But I get that. I'm relatively confident that in 2016, I would have written that John Kasich, who has no shot because he's sane and normal, that I would vote for him over Donald Trump if I was voting in a Republican Party.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Just, he says, you've only recently pivoted towards progressive rhetoric, and shouldn't we be focusing, we as progressives, be focusing more on voter registration, mutual aid, and collective bargaining instead of, and candidates with stronger resumes and more winnable seats?
You as progressives should focus on whatever you want to, whatever is going to make you happy. I don't really agree that I've only recently shifted to progressive rhetoric. If you go through the length and breadth of my blogs, which some people have done, you will find that I sometimes love to play the devil's advocate and say things that are completely off the wall, right-wing crazy to see how people react to it. You will see that I have been, in my mind, what I think of as a pragmatic progressive. I've been left of center my whole life, but maybe not as far left as the modern Progressive Party is. And the modern Progressive Party, as far left as it looks today, is the centrist Democrats of the FDR era.
Yeah, that is very true.
You're New Deal Democrats, and that's awesome because, and I'm going to go all poli-sci professor on you, but I get to do this with the DSA because when I talk about concepts, you understand them. So when I say the words Overton window, people in the DSA will understand what an Overton window is. And for those of you not familiar with this political concept, it is a window of acceptable political ideas. So an Overton window can grow and shrink, and it can move right and left. And it tells us what's an acceptable set of ideas in that time and place. So if you look at America during the FDR era, you look at New Deal Democrats, the Overton window was relatively large, but it was also left of center. Republicans of that era are conservatives of the FDR era are moderates of today, or may even be slightly liberal today. What has happened in America is the Overton window has shrunk. It has jammed itself so far to the right that any conservative idea is fine. Today, Texas created Gilead, for God's sake. And we have lost the left. So the progressives of today are New Deal Democrats of the 1940s, and I don't think I've ever been that far from that. Rhetoric shifts back and forth, frankly, because as a political operative and as a nerd, I like the debate. But I was early on AOC, who I'm a much bigger fan of than I am Bernie, and I think for Bernie, it's a rhetoric issue for me. I don't like the way it's delivered always. It's not about disagreeing with him so much as not enjoying the delivery.
Understood. And you're absolutely right. The progressives of today are centrist Democrats. It's ridiculous.
You're New Deal Democrats. You were left in the 40s, but because the Overton window has moved, you're way left.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Okay, let's go on to issues, because that was all of our questions basically for our campaign. So issues. Here's a good one. One of the questions was what issues you have with socialism. I think you in general answered that question. So should billionaires exist?
Oh God. I am fortunate enough to be dating an absolutely wonderful woman who majored in governmental tax accounting. So the conversations are phenomenal, okay? And 2 weeks ago, we were debating, I'm a believer in a 90% tax rate. As we're talking about incremental tax increases, the same way they are right now, a progressive income tax, I'm a believer in a top rate of 90%. Now, people are going to tell me this is crazy, but you know who did this? FDR did this. Mm-hmm. After the Depression, the top marginal tax rate in this country was 90%. And we've seen it get cut and get cut and get cut and get cut as Reagan, and Reagan is a huge part of this, as Reagan decided to make rich friends richer.
Yep.
So one, I believe in a 90% top marginal tax rate. And her and I have spent hours debating where that number is. And I think for me, it's 10 million. And at the same time, we have to close all these loopholes that allow a CEO to say, oh, but my salary was only 1 million. I made this 39 million in stock options and this 18 million on whatever other income. Income should be income, and a top marginal tax rate should be set that allows for Americans to pay for all the things we need collectively, roads and schools and healthcare. So I've made billionaires illegal through my tax code, but I didn't tell you that they should be illegal. They just would they would just fail to exist when I take 90% of everything over 10 million.
Yes.
So
yes, I like it. I like it. Let's see. Some slightly more local issues. When the city of Fort Wayne launches tear gas canisters at heads of protesters, how did you feel about that? Do Black Lives matter?
Yes, Black lives do matter. And policing in this country has steadily gotten away from the policing I grew up with. And that makes me really sad. Cops used to be a member of their community. They walked a beat. You talked to them in a park. They asked you how your math homework was going. Now, Cities have gotten larger. Police departments have gotten smaller as a percentage of the population of the town they're in. And we no longer have community policing. We have cops randomly driving patrols through neighborhoods they don't live in, and they don't understand everything that goes on in that neighborhood. Many members of the DSA are aware of the fact that my brother is a cop. He's been a detective and a member of the Arvada Police Department for 22 years now. So it always hurts me a little to speak out against police officers, but good policing is vital to American interests. It's vital to our cities. And good policing means more officers with less equipment, spending time in neighborhoods, getting to know them and talking to people. Black lives do matter, and there's no reason that a local police department should have tear gas, which isn't even allowed to be used by the military. It is a banned weapon of war. And we need to demilitarize the police that are on American streets.
Do you, being that you have a family member who's is a cop, do you recognize the roots of police came from the system of slavery, and that police were first started out to catch slaves, and that all of it, I know you said you support abolishing private prisons, but the whole prison system, it's all a system built against Black people.
The prison system was built to keep legalized slavery. And it's even carved out for legalized slavery in the amendment that abolishes slavery. Prison reform is a whole different topic for me than police reform. Police are a necessity on our streets, and we all want them to be effective. We want them to be safe. We want them to be respectful with the citizenry, but they are a necessity on our streets, because otherwise we're just going to have vigilante justice handling every petty crime that takes place. And abolishing police will not end crime. But police reform and prison reform are two totally different things. Prisons should exist as a method by which we rehabilitate people and help them prepare for re-entry into society. Right now, they're punitive. You're not learning life skills in a prison in Indiana. And it's because private prisons are legal. For a private prison to succeed, it has to stay full. And if every time a prisoner comes through, we rehabilitate them, we help them get a GED, we help them get a job, we help them find an apartment after they're getting out of prison. If we do all of these things, they don't end up back in prison, and eventually private prisons can't exist. That's bad for CEOs who have bought congressmen.
Right.
So we have to get back to a prison system that rehabilitates, that helps people become productive members of society. And I hate saying that because productivity means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But when you step out of a prison, I want you to have the tools to succeed now. Maybe that means prisons really need to sort of add a community college feeling to them. Maybe as opposed to just locking somebody up for 6 months and punishing them, we could start to teach them a trade so they don't have to come out and get busted selling a drug or get busted stealing something. But we have to get away from punishment and towards rehabilitation.
Why don't you support Medicare for all?
I didn't know I didn't.
You don't say it. You don't specifically say it.
I prefer the term universal healthcare. And I have repeatedly spoken about zero cost at point of contact universal healthcare. And I believe that the bill that was, if you roll back through Twitter and a blog post, the bill that was put in front of Congress this last year by members of the squad, for lack of a better term, I believe strongly have come out in support of that, because I think the bill is brilliantly written. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. And I would love it if Congress would pass that bill and I don't have to talk about this anymore, because we're there. Because in my income bracket with my dependents, I will gleefully give up 4% of my income to provide healthcare for everybody. And I've talked to single mothers who are raising one child alone and working a job who said, yeah, I understand that that bill would cost me half of 1% of my income. But right now, my child's on terrible public state insurance and I'm on no insurance. So 1/2 of 1% to insure both of us is great. I don't know why we don't think I'm for it. I don't use the term Medicare for all. I use the term universal health care. I don't know why I prefer it. It just rolls off the tongue better for me. But I believe we've been strongly for it since the website went up. I believe there's a section there that was up from day one.
And Ryan says Medicare for all is a specific bill.
Correct. So
that's probably what he's referring to.
There have been 2 different bills. I prefer the squad bill that was called universal health care.
Okay. Do you support decriminalizing sex work?
Hadn't given it a ton of consideration. I suspect that if you scroll back through old Facebook blog posts, which somebody is doing, that I have talked about it in the past as being yet another one of those things that it does not hurt me. Like, we have entirely too many laws in this country where you're not allowed to do something, but it does not affect me at all, and I can't figure out why you're not allowed to do it. Sex work falls right into that. It goes side by side for me with marijuana use. You using marijuana at home has no effect on my life. Why am I spending time legislating this? Decriminalized sex workers might have a union, and that'd be kind of cool. I love unions.
Yeah, that would be cool. We did have a question about marijuana use. So you're in favor of
federal legalization.
Right. And what about for people who are already in jail for it?
We would let 500,000 prisoners free on day one by expunging arrests for non-violent marijuana possession. 500,000, which is another one of those things that's really bad for private prisons. Yeah. But I've long spoken out in exactly that way.
Okay.
I want full federal legalization and expunge all of those records.
Okay. What about wages? We have low wages here. We hang our hat on being affordable housing, but that doesn't address the fact that inflation is a real thing and not everyone can even afford a house.
Yep.
Because of the low wages, and also that there are, for disabled people, the federal mandated they can only make so much money, they can't be married. There's all kinds of issues for disabled people. Have you?
We've had long conversations. Again, I said it earlier, I don't get to be an advocate for those groups without talking to them. And I was shocked to hear some of these things. It was shocking to me to find out that a woman I spoke to, a constituent here, has been with her partner for 14 years and they can't get married because she'll lose her benefits. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't make enough money to support them both because we live in a state where the federal minimum wage is still in place. We live in the only state. I both love this because it shows you how far Indiana has gone, and it also deeply saddens me. We live in the only state in the union where it is a state law that cities can't have their own minimum wage. Fort Wayne City Council can't go to a meeting and say, minimum wage in Fort Wayne is $15 an hour. That's a violation of Indiana law. And we're the only state where that's true. Seattle has a different minimum wage than the rest of Washington does. LA has a different minimum wage than the rest of California does. Fort Wayne or Indianapolis can't do that in Indiana because the state legislature, with a Republican supermajority, has stolen that power for themselves. They have trapped Hoosiers in poverty, where our wages haven't kept up with the cost of living. We've talked about $15 for a long time, and I love the fight for 15, but we've been fighting for 15 for so long, it's probably not even high enough anymore.
That addresses one of my questions. Awesome. What about sub-minimum wages, like how waitresses can be paid only $3 an hour?
In theory, the governmental theory behind this is that they make the rest of it up in tips.
Right.
So companies receive what's called a tip credit. I've worked in states where tip credits are against the law. And those waitresses were happier, they made better money, and they were longer term at their jobs because they didn't have to constantly worry about how much money they were going to bring home. Now, in those places at that time, and we're talking the mid 2000s in San Diego, California, minimum wage was $8.50 and there was no tip credit. So my bartenders made $8.50 plus tips. If tips were bad, things were still a little rough because $8.50 is not great money in Southern California, but it still gave them a consistent baseline. This again is a case where corporations figured out a way to pass the buck. Corporations can make more money by not paying wages. It's the single largest expense in my own business. I spend more money on wages than I do on rent. So if I can force my customers to pay wages, then I get to make more money as a corporation. The tip credit is something that needs to go away. And I hear restaurateurs in particular say, oh my God, prices are going to go up. And yes, they are. On average, I have seen prices go up. Your $10 burger is $10.50. I'm willing to pay that if people who work there and deliver that burger to me and cook that burger for me are making a livable wage.
There actually is a restaurant in, I think, Carmel in Indiana that just recently banished all tipping and is paying everybody $15 an hour.
Love it.
Love it too. Sorry.
If you happen to find that restaurant, send it my way. I want to go pay them a visit. I want to go eat there.
Yeah, I know where I saw it. I'll just have to send it to your email.
Awesome.
This one was my question. You are aware of food deserts and that Indiana has a lot of food deserts. Yeah, it was in Bloomington. Thank you, Jack.
Well, and I'm sorry, I'm smiling because I literally had this conversation with someone today.
There you go. Switchyard Brewing in Bloomington. There we go. Thank you, everyone. Awesome. So are there any policies that you would champion to help address food deserts in our area?
So I'm going to say something unpopular here, okay? A large reason that we have so many food deserts in Indiana can be traced back to the sort of end of the industrial era here. We lost all these warehouse jobs. We lost all these factory jobs. We lost all of this income. Stores left. They closed. They were replaced by Dollar Generals. Dollar Generals are a food desert. Yes, you can get food, but it's terrible food with no nutritional value. Is it the government's place to eliminate those stores so that grocery stores can come back? Because I drove past probably 4 dozen Dollar Generals today because I had to zip down to Indianapolis, pick some stuff up and come back. 4 dozen is probably on the low side, the number of Dollar Generals I drove past, and those are food deserts. I don't know how we solve that without individual cities, and maybe you can do it at a federal level and distribute that money to cities and counties, but city councils are going to have to step in and say, we need a grocery store in this town. Here's the money to help open a grocery store in this town. I think ultimately that is a state level issue and the state needs to do something about that. Maybe it is possible that there's a federal carve out in a budget that gives the states help monetarily to do that.
In terms of expanding, a lot of talk has been done about expanding the Supreme Court, giving DC statehood, you know, maybe Puerto Rico and the other territories, and expanding the House. So some questions about that, around that. Let's talk about the House where you're going to be in. So the Permanent Apportionment Act of 1929 limits the number of members in the House to 435. Do you support removing this limit?
I haven't spent a ton of time looking at it. I will tell you that I have issues with the way we have some states grossly overrepresented and some grossly underrepresented. I would like to see a number of people in the House that allows us to evenly represent everybody. Maybe that is every person in the House represents 1 million people, so it's 330, not 435. Or maybe it's 500,000 and it's 660. But whatever that new number is, we need to get that number to be level, as opposed to some congressmen representing 750 people and some congresswomen representing 150,000 people.
Do you support, because you said you've recently expressed support for expanding the Supreme Court and ending lifetime appointments. Do you have in mind what that looks like? Maybe 18-year term limits and only allowing 2 justices per presidential term or something like that?
12 is what I was thinking, actually.
Okay.
I want to see the court expanded, but not necessarily for the reason other people are talking about all the time. The court right now is a disaster, and what happened in Texas today is offensive to my very soul. But the other reason to expand the court is because it's years behind. We wait for the Supreme Court to hear cases 3 years and 4 years sometimes. So if we went to a court that was as many even as 24 people and assigned every year, here's a new justice, here's 2 new justices, these 2 12-year terms end this year, new Democrat, new Republican, new Democrat, new Republican, every year. It would allow the court to be more effective because it would clear that backlog. Our Constitution guarantees a swift trial, and then people wait years to be heard at the Supreme Court.
Do you support DC statehood? And what about Puerto Rico and other territories?
I support the people in those places being able to make their own decisions. DC has quite clearly said, oh my God, it's time for statehood. And DC is a weird case when we talk about self-determination because it's on the mainland, it's in the country.
Mm.
The people of Puerto Rico deserve self-determination, whether that be as an independent nation, continuing their status as a protectorate, or statehood. And if the Puerto Rican people vote for statehood, Congress must approve it instantly. There should not be a debate about will that be 2 Democratic senators or how many House seats. If the people of Puerto Rico vote for statehood, Congress must approve immediately. But the people of Puerto Rico should make that choice.
Good. What are your thoughts on Afghanistan?
That's a very broad general subject. You're going to need to narrow it down a little. Going to need to narrow it down a little. Which thoughts on what?
Yeah. Do you know who had that question?
I think it was referring to the withdrawal and why we were there in the first place.
Okay.
I love that I got to spend like 6 hours today with a friend of mine in politics because we talked about all these things. September 11th, our country was attacked. And soon after that, we went to Afghanistan with a mission: end terrorism, get Osama bin Laden, and make it so that Al-Qaeda could not threaten the United States at home or abroad. 10 years after we did that, we accomplished that mission. And for the life of you, I cannot tell you what we did in Afghanistan for the 10 years after that. Throughout the history of the world, no country has had a successful democracy forced upon them. You cannot build a nation, you cannot force people to have an elected democracy. So for 10 years since Osama bin Laden was killed, I don't know why we were there, except that, like all things in our country, follow the money. Follow the money from defense contractors like Eric Prince. Follow the money as it gets funneled into congressional pockets so that we can build more tanks and build more planes and send more young men and women off to war. There are men and women who died among that 13 last week who never knew an America at peace. I would like to know that America at peace again.
Staying on the international stage, how do you stand with Palestine?
This is a real touchy subject where I can give you pros and cons on both sides. The Palestinian people deserve a free, safe, secure nation. So do the Jewish people. And I don't know how we solve that problem. If I did know how we solve that problem, then I wouldn't be talking to you. I'd be off collecting my Nobel Peace Prize. Smarter people than anybody who's on this call, and certainly smarter people than me, have tried to solve this problem for 50 years or more now. All people deserve a safe, secure nation. I don't know how we make that happen.
Ryan asked, would you vote to approve weapons sales to Israel?
I don't think that we really need to sell the Israelis weapons. They can continue to make their own, and they do it well enough that they sell them all over the world. I'm not sure that I would approve weapons sales to anybody. American weapon manufacturing and American weapon sales have promulgated wars throughout the world. So let's not talk about not selling guns to Israel. Let's talk about not selling guns to anybody.
And a couple more domestic things. Elizabeth Warren's plans for where to spend the money that she would have made if we had taxed the billionaires, millionaires, and billionaires. Part of her plans were addressing student loans. Part of her plans were free childcare for ages 0 to 5 and aftercare for school children. Where do you stand on those issues?
Those all sound awesome. I have not seen her entire plan. I'm not aware of everything that's in it, but those
from
three
when
things.
She ran for president.
Okay. I honestly was so busy doing other campaigns that I wasn't following a ton of what she was doing. Those are all things that I think are more important to make America a more productive society. If we want everybody working, we have to be able to provide childcare. And at this point in time, it is cheaper to stay home and not work than it is to send your child to qualified, safe childcare facilities. We talk about food deserts, but childcare deserts are also a very real thing. And those depress wages in that area, forcing one parent to stay home, and they depress educational opportunities in that area because those early childhood care centers tend to also be qualified educators. Those people will help that early childhood development as we prep those kids 0 to 5 to move into kindergarten. After school care is part of that same issue. I'm a latchkey kid. I grew up in the 80s. So what that meant is that when I got out of school, I was done with my day 2 or 3 hours before the parents sometimes. And if both parents were out of the house working at that time, that meant 3 hours of sitting around alone, whether I was 10 or 18. So incorporating after school care into that same thing and really making it part of a whole experience, whether you want to talk about it from the ages 0 to 18, or you want to talk about it from the age of 0 to 22, you can talk about it in that whole range there, because it should be early childhood development and care into public schools that are well funded and well run into whatever your career is going to be and whatever that path is. If that path is microbiology, that might mean 7 years of college. And if that path is as a plumber, I got to tell you, when I needed one, I waited 6 weeks to get a plumber because the trades are dying in this country. We don't do enough to encourage kids to go into those trades. And that needs to be part of how we think about that educational thing.
I agree. I'm trying to push my 18-year-old to go into the trades.
Amen. Plumbing, welding. We talked to members of the Carpenters Union recently. They have an entire hospital on hold here in Fort Wayne, $40 million worth of carpentry work because they don't have the more than 200 bodies they need.
Yep. We usually, in Congress, you use a lot of earmarks to help corporations. Would you be willing to champion the use of earmarks to support programs and projects for the working poor?
I'd be willing to abolish the use of earmarks. So you're eventually going to get around to another topic here that, and we're going to come back to the same thing. When you get to this other topic, I'm going to say the same thing to you. Sometimes you have to completely tear a system down and start over, or it's never going to accomplish what you want it to. And we have allowed earmarks for so many things that the budgetary process no longer functions. So we have to abolish earmarks completely for everything and get back to writing simple budgets that say this amount of money is going to do this thing, and then let people who are more experienced in that thing be in charge of exactly how that money is spent.
Preaching to the choir there, preaching to the choir. I'd like to open it up to any questions for anyone else on the call. If you one person talk and then start saying stack, we've got 15 minutes left. Anyone?
Well, then I'm going to ask myself a question, because I'm with the DSA, and Jack isn't going to get to it and give me this, and Jack is going to be so excited about this. Do you want to be excited about something, Jack?
Maybe. I mean, we have more questions, but
oh, okay, go ahead.
Sorry. Do you support the construction of Line 3?
Oh yes, I'm sorry, I missed those.
I don't know that I've seen what Line 3 is.
So Line 3 is the pipeline that's threatening the water supply in the U.S. and it violates some tribal treaty rights.
Oh yeah, I don't support the building of any pipeline. I support us moving to green energy. Every time we talk about another pipeline or another oil field, all we're really talking about is drilling more holes in a planet that is so full of holes it doesn't need them anymore. So you never have to ask me if I support this pipeline or this power plant, because the answer is always going to be no.
Do you support Black Lives?
What was that?
Do you support Black Lives Matter?
Well, we talked about this earlier. Black lives do matter.
I heard that, but I also heard that you have a soft spot for your brother, the police officer.
I'm always going to have a soft spot for my brother. I love him.
So would you be able to set aside your feelings for police reform?
Well, we've talked a lot about police reform. Yes, we need to get back to community policing. We need to get back to police officers that know a neighborhood, that live in the neighborhood, that walk a beat in a neighborhood, not just endlessly drive patrol cars and think they see something bad. And we need police officers who look more like the neighborhood they're patrolling and can be a part of the neighborhood and the community they're patrolling. Black lives do matter, and to get to that point where Black lives are treated the same in this country means police reform that recognizes the past issues.
Were you at the protests?
Which protest? I've been to lots of them.
At our Fort Wayne one.
I was not at the Fort Wayne BLM protest. I was at the Denver one. I was still living there.
Okay. So you would be able to set aside your feelings for your police officer brother?
Oh, because
police reform.
Good cops will tell you they need reform.
Are you against demilitarizing the police?
No, I believe I said that several times already. Yeah, demilitarizing the police is the single most important thing we have to do to get back to community policing. The fact of the matter is we need more cops with less equipment so that they can walk through parks and be part of a neighborhood, so that they can walk through a beat that takes them through the convenience store where they say hi to the clerk and grab their morning coffee. If we take away the money we spend on equipment and we devote that money to people and to training, policing gets better throughout the country.
I can agree with that. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan wants to know, how many voters have you reached and how are you reaching them?
Social media events. I don't keep a count. I have no idea. I was this last weekend up in Kosciuszko County at the annual Lily Pad Cruise, which was 100 Democrats aboard a boat for a couple of hours. And it was a great opportunity to talk about issues and do a little fundraising and make sure that people understood what was going on. Hanifa was up there as well. So her and I finally got to be in the same place at the same time, which was awesome because we keep missing one another. So, and that's all we can really do is keep going places, keep taking the Zoom call, keep taking the meeting. And I'm going to go everywhere that people will let me go, because we can't reach voters just through Twitter or just through the news or just by knocking doors. You have to go to every little place you possibly can and every approach you can take.
Chris wants to know, who is your least favorite Supreme Court justice?
So he hasn't been on the bench long enough to be full of reasons for me to dislike her. She was behind the 8 ball immediately because she replaced an idol. So it's clearly Amy, who I won't even give a title or a last name to. It's clearly Amy. But is that just because I think she's a terrible person? Or is it because she was replacing an absolute idol, somebody who I admire? And it's a little bit of both.
Anyone else? Make sure I didn't miss any chats. Okay. Okay, John, I know you need to go.
I got 9 more minutes.
What was the thing that was supposed to make me happy?
Come on, Jack. There's a question you've been asking me and trying to change my mind on.
Have you tweeted about it? Because I left out questions that you tweeted about.
We've had numerous conversations about qualified immunity. Yes, you and I have?
I don't think that was me.
Really? Who was it? It was a DSA member. Could have sworn it was you, Jack. So remember what I said about earmarks? How sometimes we have to tear something down and completely throw it away? I've been saying for a while that it's not that we need to dispose of qualified immunity, it's that we need to roll it back before the Supreme Court ruined it. The beauty of running for Congress is you can pick up the phone and you can call a constitutional lawyer and go, hey, I'm running for Congress. Can you help me understand something? And that lawyer laughed at me. The Supreme Court never completely screws up something that Congress wrote and then lets Congress have it back. So we have to abolish qualified immunity. If we want something that works, if we want something that is similar to the old standards for qualified immunity, we will never be able to roll it back to that without first abolishing it. In the same way that I said I want to abolish that earmark practice, we have to tear qualified immunity completely down and start over to find something that actually works again.
One of the things, going back to something that you said about the Supreme Court and how you think there should be every year one Democrat and one Republican. Judges are supposed to be nonpartisan. And even if you look at who appointed, like the party of who appointed a judge, take for instance, John Roberts, he's ruled on the Democratic side of things or on the liberal side of things more than just a few times. I've actually been pleasantly surprised by that. So
yeah, and particularly recently, because John Roberts looked at the court and went, oh my God, what did we do?
Right.
So he's strived to be a more moderating voice. And while we say judges should be nonpartisan, in many places in this country, judges run for office and they run for office with an R or a D on the ballot.
Yes.
They're running as partisan judges. So whether they're members of that party or whether we want to say, here's a Supreme Court caucus. The Republicans have a Supreme Court caucus. The Democrats have a Supreme Court caucus. And each caucus gets to appoint a new justice and then the president approves them. Or whatever that process looks like. I think that balance on the court is actually healthy for America. I don't want 9 justices or 12 justices or 40 justices, whatever the number is. I don't want that number of people in agreement. The court has been at its best And Congress has been at its best when people were willing to disagree with one another, have conversations, and then in the case of Congress, find a compromise. And in the case of the Supreme Court, decide together on what that law really meant. But you have to have people that disagree to do that. You can't have just one blob of the same.
So you would want it to be more balanced and not necessarily, doesn't have to necessarily be Republican, Democrat.
No, but appointed by those groups. And ultimately in my brain, you have a single Chief Justice who never hears a case, but says, here are the 3 Democratic appointees, here are the 3 Republican appointees, these are the 6 justices that will hear this case. And then we go to the next 3, and they hear this case, and so on, to clear that backlog, to guarantee rapid justice, and to still provide balance to the court systems.
Makes sense. Anyone else?
Lily, stop. She's talking.
Your dog would like to roll in.
Yeah, she's talking over there.
He has 100% of the vote of the pets in his household.
Yes, it's because I feed them. I cheated.
Yes.
They're dependent upon me for food.
Yes. Anyone else? Anything that I missed, Jack?
I don't think so. One other question I had, would you be in favor of someday abolishing the Senate?
Did you say abolishing the Senate?
Mm-hmm.
No.
This is unrepresentative.
Oh, see, I don't think it is. I think it's differently representative.
Right, but not
The
representative
United
people.
States, well, and that's, see, but I'm okay with that if we fix the congressional issue. The House represents people, the Senate represents states.
But you're in
And
favor of keeping that situation. I guess that
if we can fix the representation of people, then yes.
What's the one thing, the first thing that you would do if you could pass, you go to the House and you pass a law? What's the first thing?
Anything I want?
Anything.
Universal healthcare. Everything else starts there. I can educate a populace if it is healthy. We start there.
All right. If we don't have anything else.
Do I get to ask a question now?
Sure, you got 3 minutes.
What is the DSA looking for? What does the DSA want out of a candidate?
Anyone thoughts?
I can try to answer that.
Okay, go for it.
Let me get this little man out of here.
Baby, how old?
10 weeks.
Wow,
DSA
congrats.
wants 10-week-olds. That's what the DSA, no. The DSA wants candidates that will unapologetically stand up for progressive and democratic, social democratic ideas. The DSA wants candidates that will put people always in front of corporate profits. That is the main #1 issue with the Democratic Party, is being funded by lobbyists, by corporations, by PACs that are then funded by corporations and the rich, and therefore they do their bidding. So we want somebody who's funded by clean money. We want somebody who's unapologetic and not afraid to stand up for not just progressive politics, but Black, brown people, BIPOC people, indigenous folks, we, as well as our, gay, lesbian, transgender brothers and sisters and everybody else. And then we want somebody who will be unapologetic in working for labor rights and for working people and for the working class in this country that powers everything. And, it's not just about individual issues because, states are different. We get that. But someone who is a strong proponent of those things that I laid out, that's what DSA is looking for.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
And I agree 100%, Ryan. Okay, 1 minute. Anyone else? Or anything else you'd like to know, John?
No, and I appreciate Ryan taking the time to answer that. It's not often that I get to come and ask questions at these things. It's there's a lot of talk out there about the DSA and how the DSA may operate differently in Southern California than it does in Fort Wayne, and how they might be doing something in Buffalo or Nevada that would never work in Fort Wayne. So I like to see where we are on those things. And I don't, listening to Ryan, all I can do is nod and go, yeah, that's why we're doing this. Those are the things we're fighting for. So I hope the DSA will be with us. When we talk about money in particular, I have said millions of times to campaign staff that God, I hate fundraising and I'd like to never do it again. So if somebody has piles of clean money sitting around, please let me know, because I would love to stop begging for other money. Like at this point in time, it's take the money we can find, because Jim Banks is a danger to democracy. But we have to play in this battleground that is not very well balanced or fair. So at the same time, I can't tie an arm behind my back and say, well, I'm going to fight anyway. So the money is a big deal. We have to keep finding that money. We have to find the bodies. Campaign staff is working very hard. I need 60 more. And 6 months from now, I need 100 more on top of that. We have a lot of work to do. And I really hope that you're going to be on our team and help us out with